HOA Karen called out single mom's laundry line, didn't know the HOA president was her brother. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The sun was setting on a warm summer evening, casting a golden glow across the rows of affordable homes in the working-class neighborhood. The streets, though lined with small but well-kept houses, had a certain sense of community. Neighbors knew each other, helped each other, and occasionally found themselves caught up in the petty disputes that inevitably arose in such close-knit areas. But despite the shared sense of camaraderie, there were always a few who couldn't resist trying to enforce their own sense of what was proper. Karen was one of those people. Karen had recently moved into the neighborhood, and it didn't take long for her to begin pointing out what she perceived as flaws in the community. She was the type of person who believed that things should be a certain way and that rules, no matter how small, should be followed to the letter. It wasn't just about making sure the lawns were mowed or that the trash bins were put away on time. Karen had a very specific view of what was acceptable and what wasn't. And, as it often goes with newcomers, she didn't hesitate to make sure everyone else knew what she thought. The latest issue? The laundry line outside the house of a single mother named Linda. Linda had 2 children, both young and full of energy, and she worked long hours as a cashier at a local grocery store. Her life was often a blur of work, caring for her children, and trying to keep the house in order. She didn't have the luxury of spending much time on appearances, but she did the best she could. One thing that kept her going, though, was her ability to make do with what she had. Hanging clothes on the laundry line in her small backyard was one of those simple, everyday things that helped her save money. It wasn't something she ever gave much thought to, it was just practical. But Karen, with her ever-watchful eyes, had taken issue with it. To her, the sight of laundry hanging outside was a violation of some unwritten rule about the neighborhood's appearance. It made the place look like a poor neighborhood, she would mutter to anyone who would listen. After all, if Linda had a dryer, why didn't she use it? Karen believed that her version of a neat and tidy neighborhood should be upheld, and laundry lines had no place in her vision. One afternoon, as Linda was hanging the last of her laundry to dry in the sun, Karen approached her yard. Linda, who had just finished wrestling a stubborn pair of jeans onto the line, glanced up, her brow furrowing as she saw Karen making her way toward her. "Hey, Linda," Karen called out, her voice sharp but overly polite, as if the words that followed would somehow soften the blow. "I'm sure you're a good person, but I really think you should consider taking down that laundry line. It's not exactly, how do I put this?" Karen paused, as if searching for the right words. "It's just a little unsightly, you know? We all want this neighborhood to look nice, don't we?" Linda blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected to be confronted about something so small, and certainly not by Karen, who had only recently become a part of the community. "I'm sorry, Karen, but I need to hang the laundry to save money. I don't have the time or resources to use a dryer all the time." Karen waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, I get it, I really do. But we need to maintain the neighborhood's image. The HOA has guidelines, and I'm pretty sure laundry lines fall under things that aren't supposed to be visible from the street. It just doesn't look good." Linda's frustration started to build. She wasn't one to engage in conflict, but this felt different. She had done nothing wrong, just tried to manage her household the best way she knew how, and here was Karen, trying to shame her over something so trivial. "I don't think it's hurting anyone, Karen. It's not like it's a big deal. It's just clothes drying in my backyard. No one else can see them." Karen's expression hardened, her tone becoming more forceful. "You'd be surprised how many people notice these things. It affects the entire neighborhood. I've already spoken to some of the other residents, and we all agree, it's just not the right look. I think you should take it down, or I'll be forced to bring it up at the next HOA meeting." Linda's heart sank. The HOA. Of course, Karen would go straight to the HOA, the group that had the power to enforce rules, no matter how minor. She didn't want to cause trouble, but she also didn't want to be bullied into changing something so harmless. I don't think it's worth making a big deal over, Linda said quietly, hoping to diffuse the situation. But I'm not taking it down. I'll just keep doing what works for me. Karen, her face flushed with indignation, turned on her heel. Fine, she muttered, but don't say I didn't warn you. And with that, she left, marching away with the self-righteous air of someone who believed she had won an argument. Linda stood there for a moment, her hands gripping the wooden slats of the fence, as the weight of the confrontation settled in. She didn't want to cause trouble. She just wanted to provide for her kids and do the best she could under difficult circumstances. But now, it seemed, her simple act of hanging laundry had become the latest battleground in Karen's crusade for perfection. She knew what was coming next. The HOA meeting would be the scene of Karen's next attack, and Linda wasn't sure how she could fight back. What she didn't know was that the next HOA meeting would take an unexpected turn. When the day of the meeting arrived, Linda decided she would attend, even though she felt out of place. She didn't know much about HOA meetings or the rules that governed them, but she couldn't just let Karen dictate what she could and couldn't do in her own yard. She had every right to hang her clothes out to dry, just as much as anyone had the right to mow their lawn or plant flowers. When she entered the meeting room, she felt a sense of nervousness, unsure of what to expect, but she was determined to make her voice heard. The meeting was in full swing when Linda arrived. She took a seat in the back, trying to remain as inconspicuous as possible. Her heart raced as she waited for Karen to make her case. Karen, of course, wasted no time in standing up and presenting her complaint about the laundry line. I've had several complaints, she said, about the laundry line hanging in Linda's yard. It's causing an eyesore and needs to be dealt with immediately. I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels this way, and I think it's time the HOA took action. Karen's words seemed to hang in the air, and Linda felt a wave of frustration wash over her. She was about to stand up and respond when, to her surprise, the HOA president, her brother, James, spoke up. I think we need to take a step back here, James said, his voice calm but firm. Karen, I've listened to your concerns, and I've heard Linda's side. But I have to be honest with you, this isn't something we should be regulating. There's no law against hanging laundry outside, and I don't think it's an issue the HOA should be involved in. Linda, I'm on your side. The neighborhood shouldn't be dictating how you live in your own home. Linda's jaw nearly dropped. She had known James was a member of the HOA, but she hadn't realized he was the president. Karen, on the other hand, looked utterly stunned. Her face turned pale as she processed the fact that the very person she had been lobbying to support her side was actually her opponent. The room was silent as James continued, addressing the board and the community at large. The HOA's role is to maintain common areas and enforce rules that affect the community as a whole. Personal choices, like the use of a laundry line, don't fall into that category. Let's move on and focus on issues that actually affect the neighborhood. With that, the meeting was adjourned, and Karen was left to fume in silence, her plans for controlling Linda thoroughly thwarted. Linda, for her part, could barely believe what had just happened. She had expected to face a room full of people who would side with Karen, but instead, she had found an unexpected ally in James. As Linda left the meeting, she felt a sense of relief and gratitude. She hadn't just been defended, she had been vindicated. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe again, knowing that her small act of independence hadn't been stripped away by someone else's sense of superiority. And as for Karen? Well, Linda was pretty sure the neighborhood wouldn't be hearing any more complaints from her anytime soon. The next few days following the HOA meeting were a mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty for Linda. She had, for the first time, stood up for herself in a way that felt like a small, yet significant victory. Karen had lost, and Linda's laundry line would remain as it was, just another part of her modest home, part of her life that brought her peace and comfort. Yet, despite the resolution of the immediate issue, Linda couldn't help but feel a ripple of tension in the neighborhood. Things hadn't been the same since Karen had decided to make an example of her, and though the decision in the meeting had been in her favor, Linda knew that Karen wasn't the type of person to simply let things go. Walking down the street to her mailbox a few days later, Linda noticed that the usual friendliness of her neighbors seemed absent. Some greeted her with tight smiles, others with barely concealed avoidance. It was as if they didn't know where to stand after the showdown at the HOA meeting. For all the talk about community and togetherness, it seemed like there were still invisible lines drawn between those who embraced the HOA's rigid rules and those who didn't, even if that line was only in the minds of people like Karen. It bothered Linda more than she cared to admit. She had never been one to make waves, and she certainly didn't want to be viewed as a troublemaker in her own neighborhood, but the reality was, that's what she had become, at least in some people's eyes. The laundry line had symbolized her refusal to conform, her decision to live life on her own terms. But she never intended for that simple act of practicality to make her a target. The phone rang just as she sat down with a cup of tea in her kitchen. She answered it on the fourth ring, her mind still distracted by the uneasy tension she had been feeling. "Hello," she asked, trying to mask the exhaustion in her voice. "Linda, it's Karen." The voice on the other end was sharp, almost too cheerful. "I just wanted to follow up on the meeting. I'm sure you're feeling proud of your little victory, but I think you should know, this isn't over. Not by a long shot." Linda's grip on the phone tightened, the familiar feeling of frustration rising in her chest. She had hoped that after the HOA's decision, Karen would leave her alone, but it was clear that wasn't going to be the case. "Karen, we've already gone through this. The board made their decision. I don't need to explain myself to you anymore." Karen's laugh on the other end of the line was condescending, almost mocking. "Oh, I'm not here to explain anything to you, Linda. I'm here to warn you. The next time you hang that laundry up, we'll be having another conversation. And believe me, it won't be in your favor. There's a reason the board didn't outright ban those eyesores, they just know better than to make a scene over something so small. But trust me, there are ways to get what I want. I have plenty of people on my side, and I don't think this is over by a long shot." The line went dead after that. Karen had hung up on her, leaving Linda staring at the receiver in disbelief. A chill ran through her as she realized Karen wasn't just upset about the laundry line anymore. This was personal. Karen had made it clear that she would go to any length to have things her way, even if that meant causing more strife in the neighborhood. Linda knew she would have to be careful moving forward, but she also couldn't let Karen bully her into submission again. Her simple act of hanging clothes had become a symbol, and she wasn't about to let someone else dictate her life. The following days were uneventful, but the air in the neighborhood seemed to grow heavier. Linda received a couple of looks from her neighbors that she couldn't quite place. Were they sympathetic or were they silently judging her? She couldn't be sure, but it made her feel increasingly uncomfortable. Her children, too, seemed to sense the change in atmosphere. They asked her why their friends' parents didn't want them to play outside anymore, why they were being told to avoid their house. Linda tried to brush it off, but the reality was sinking in. The neighborhood had fractured. Some people, like Karen, felt justified in enforcing their version of normal, while others, like Linda, had found themselves on the receiving end of that judgment. And now that Karen had shown just how far she was willing to go to get what she wanted, Linda found herself wondering just how much more she could take. It was on a particularly quiet afternoon when the next escalation came. Linda was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through her bills and trying to get some work done before picking up her kids from school. She had just marked a payment as received when a loud knock echoed through her front door. Her heart sank as she set the pen down. It was the kind of knock that sounded official, the kind that made her stomach turn in dread. She stood up slowly, bracing herself for whatever came next, and opened the door to find a uniformed officer standing there, a stern look on his face. "Are you Linda Green?" he asked, his tone polite but formal. "Yes, that's me," Linda replied, her voice quivering with uncertainty. "Is everything okay?" The officer nodded. "I'm here to serve you a notice of violation from the HOA. It's regarding your laundry line. There's been a formal complaint filed, and you are being fined for violating the community's aesthetic guidelines. You have 10 days to remove the laundry line and bring your property into compliance, or further action will be taken." Linda felt her blood run cold as she took the notice from the officer's hand. The notice was official looking, filled with legal jargon that made her head spin. She read through it quickly. Basically, it was the HOA making good on Karen's threat, using the system she had so readily manipulated to target Linda once again. The notice claimed that her laundry line was in violation of community standards, despite the fact that she hadn't received any specific warnings prior to this. It was as if Karen had been waiting for the right moment to press her advantage. "Is this really necessary?" Linda asked, her voice rising as the anger bubbled up. "I thought the board had already made their decision. Why is this happening again?" The officer simply shrugged. "I'm just here to deliver the notice. If you have any further questions, you'll need to contact the HOA office." As the officer turned to leave, Linda stood frozen in place, staring at the paper in her hand. It wasn't just a fine, it was another battle, another fight she hadn't asked for, and it felt like the walls were closing in on her. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't afford to pay a fine, and she wasn't about to back down again. But this time, she would be ready. She dialed Emma's number, the lawyer who had helped her through the first HOA meeting. After explaining the situation, Emma assured her that they wouldn't let this go without a fight. "The HOA can't just keep harassing you, Linda. They've already been warned by the board. You've got a case, and we'll make sure they understand that. We'll go to the next meeting and get this resolved once and for all. Don't worry." Linda felt a wave of relief wash over her as Emma's calm, confident voice reassured her. This time, Linda wasn't alone in the fight. She wasn't just defending her laundry line. She was defending her right to live her life on her terms, without someone else's standards being thrust upon her. She knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she was ready. She would stand up for herself, for her kids, and for everyone in the neighborhood who had ever felt the weight of Karen's judgment. It wasn't just about a laundry line anymore, it was about reclaiming her peace and her place in the community. And with Emma's help, she was prepared for whatever came next. The following days felt like a blur to Linda as she prepared for the upcoming HOA meeting. The weight of the notice that had been served to her was heavy, and with every passing moment, the anxiety began to build up again. She had hoped the issue with the laundry line would be resolved when the board had ruled in her favor during the last meeting, but it seemed that Karen's determination to impose her own standards on the neighborhood wasn't so easily swayed. The officer's visit had been the final straw, the moment when Linda realized that this was no longer just a matter of hanging clothes outside, it had become a matter of principle. This wasn't simply about a line of laundry anymore, it was about the ongoing battle for her dignity and the right to live her life on her own terms, without constant judgment and interference from someone who had no right to dictate how others should behave in their own homes. Linda couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. She had always been a quiet person, content to mind her own business and focus on raising her children. The last thing she had ever expected was to become the subject of a neighborhood dispute, let alone be dragged through an ongoing legal fight with the HOA. It felt like everything she had worked for, the simple peace of mind that came with raising her kids and making ends meet, was being threatened by a woman who had made it her mission to control everyone around her. The fact that Karen had resorted to such extreme measures, attempting to shame Linda over something as basic as a laundry line, left her feeling both angry and defeated at the same time. But through it all, there was a fire in Linda that wouldn't let her give up. The last thing she wanted to do was back down. Her children were watching her, and she knew that if she gave up now, it would set the wrong example for them. They had already seen the way Karen had tried to shame their mother, and they had been confused and upset by the situation. But Linda didn't want them to think that standing up for what's right was something to be afraid of. She had to show them that standing firm in the face of adversity, even when the odds seemed stacked against you, was the right thing to do. With that determination in her heart, Linda spent the days leading up to the HOA meeting preparing for what would be the most important conversation of her life. She reviewed all of the documents, read through the bylaws again, and even had a few conversations with Emma, the lawyer who had helped her navigate the previous issues with the HOA. Emma was still on her side, and Linda appreciated the support more than she could express. The lawyer had explained that the HOA's fine was likely unenforceable based on the specific wording of their rules, but Linda knew that getting the board to recognize that wouldn't be an easy task. She had to make them understand that this was more than just a laundry line. It was a fight for fairness, for freedom of choice, and for her right to live her life without fear of someone else's arbitrary rules. The day of the meeting arrived, and Linda felt a wave of nausea hit her as she stood in front of her house, staring at the laundry line that had become the center of the entire storm. It was still there, fluttering gently in the breeze, a symbol of her determination but also a reminder of the pressure she had been under. It seemed so small, so innocuous, and yet it had become the source of all this conflict. Linda's hands trembled as she straightened the sheets and made sure everything was in place, not out of shame, but out of nerves. She wasn't ashamed of what she had done. She was frustrated that something so insignificant could escalate into this much drama. When Linda entered the meeting room, she was greeted by the same faces as before, some familiar and others less so. The board members were already seated at their long conference table, looking like they were ready to dive into a legal discussion that none of them particularly wanted to have. As Linda made her way to the front of the room, she noticed Karen sitting at the far side, her arms crossed and her eyes narrowed. It was clear that she wasn't going to let this go easily. The tension in the room was palpable, and Linda could feel the eyes of the other residents on her as she took her seat, her back straight with determination. She wasn't just going to let Karen win, she was going to make sure that the board understood exactly what was at stake. The meeting began as expected, with Mr. Larson calling the proceedings to order and briefly summarizing the issue at hand. "We're here to discuss the ongoing situation regarding the laundry line on Linda Green's property," Mr. Larson said, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of caution. "As you know, a complaint was filed by Karen, and after a recent visit from the officer, a notice of violation was issued. Linda, you are here to respond to this complaint and to present your case." Linda nodded, her throat dry as she stood up to speak. She had prepared herself for this moment, but the reality of it still hit hard as she addressed the room. "Thank you for your time," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves that were creeping in. "I know this seems like a small issue, but I want to make it clear that this is about more than just a laundry line. It's about the right to live in a way that makes sense for my family, to live without constant judgment, and to make decisions that work for us. I understand that the HOA has guidelines, but those guidelines should not be used as a way to control people's personal choices. I have 2 children to care for, and the laundry line is a small way for me to save money and make sure they have everything they need. I'm not trying to upset anyone or make the neighborhood look bad. This is about my ability to take care of my family and do what works for us. I've always taken pride in my home, and I'll continue to do so. But I shouldn't have to live in fear of someone like Karen deciding what I can and can't do." The room was silent for a moment as Linda's words settled in. She could feel Karen glaring at her from across the room, her disapproval evident. Linda was aware of how Karen's influence had already spread throughout the neighborhood, and she knew that Karen had worked hard to paint her as a troublemaker. But Linda refused to let that image define her. She wasn't a troublemaker, she was a mother trying to make the best of her situation. When Linda finished speaking, she sat down, her hands resting in her lap as she waited for the board to respond. Karen stood up immediately, her voice laced with frustration as she launched into her argument. "This isn't just about Linda's personal choices," she said, her tone sharp. "This is about maintaining a certain level of respect and order in the neighborhood. A laundry line may seem harmless, but it sends a message that we're not concerned with the standards of this community. It's about appearances, something we should all care about." Linda clenched her fists, but she held her tongue. She knew Karen would twist things, as she always did. But she wasn't going to let her get away with it this time. The board listened to Karen's speech, nodding in agreement as she continued to make her case. But Linda could see that there was hesitation in the room. They had heard her. They had seen the frustration on her face, the sincerity in her voice. This wasn't just about laundry, it was about respect and fairness. When the board president spoke, it was clear that things were shifting. "After hearing both sides, we've come to a decision," he said, his voice firm but thoughtful. "Linda, you're allowed to keep your laundry line. The board believes that your right to maintain your property in a way that works for you should not be infringed upon. Karen, we understand your concerns, but we also believe that it's important for the community to allow for personal choices, as long as they don't cause harm. Linda felt a rush of relief as the decision was made, and she couldn't help but look over at Karen, whose face was frozen in a scowl. The fight was over. She had won, not just for herself, but for anyone else who had ever been made to feel less than because of someone else's idea of what was acceptable. As the meeting came to a close, Linda stood up, her heart swelling with pride and relief. She had fought for her family, for her rights, and she had emerged victorious. It wasn't just about a laundry line, it was about standing up for herself, for her children, and for the freedom to live in a way that worked for her. And that, Linda knew, was worth every minute of the fight. The days following the HOA meeting felt like a strange mix of liberation and quiet reflection for Linda. The decision to allow her to keep her laundry line had been a victory, but it wasn't one that felt entirely sweet. In the end, Karen's campaign to control the neighborhood had failed, but the ripple effects of that confrontation lingered. Despite the HOA's ruling, Linda couldn't help but notice the shift in the community. Some neighbors who had been cordial in the past seemed to avoid eye contact with her now, while others kept their distance, clearly uncomfortable with the decision that had been made. It wasn't overt hostility, but there was a sense that Linda had become an outlier in a place where conformity had long been the norm. As Linda walked down the street, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed in the way people viewed her. The open, friendly smiles from before were few and far between now. Even the children, who had once eagerly played together in the street, seemed hesitant to visit her house. It wasn't the support she had hoped for, nor the validation she expected after standing her ground. Instead, it was as if the community had fractured into two sides, those who, like Karen, believed that everything had to conform to a certain standard, and those, like Linda, who understood that there was room for individuality within the walls of a neighborhood. Linda could feel her own discomfort as she passed by familiar faces, now carefully avoiding her gaze. She was aware that Karen's influence had worked in the background, and even though the board had sided with her, the tension in the air made it clear that some people were still too afraid of rocking the boat. She had hoped the decision would bring unity, a sense of relief, and maybe even a little support from those who might have been too afraid to speak up. But instead, she was left with a sense of isolation. That evening, as she prepared dinner for her children, the phone rang. Linda knew who it was before she even picked it up, Emma, her lawyer, who had been a steady source of support throughout the entire ordeal. She had been with Linda every step of the way, advising her through the previous HOA meeting and offering legal counsel that had ultimately helped win her case. The familiar ring of the phone somehow brought comfort to Linda, as it was a reminder that she wasn't entirely alone in this. "Hey, Linda," Emma's voice came through warmly, "how are you holding up?" "I'm fine," Linda replied, but she knew it was a lie. "It's just been a little strange around here. I thought things would go back to normal after the meeting, but they haven't. It feels like the neighborhood's split now. People are either with me or against me, and it's hard to tell who's who." Emma paused for a moment before speaking again, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not going to lie to you, Linda, it's going to be tough. It's always tough when you stand up for something that goes against the status quo. People are uncomfortable with change, even if it's something as simple as a laundry line. But don't let Karen's petty influence make you feel isolated. You've done the right thing. And eventually, the right people will see that." Linda sighed, a mixture of relief and doubt swirling in her chest. "I know, Emma. I'm just tired, you know? Tired of fighting, tired of feeling like I'm the one causing all the drama. I didn't ask for this. I just want to live my life without being told how to do it." "I hear you," Emma said, her tone softening. "But remember this, you've shown your kids what it means to fight for what's right. You've given them an example of standing up for yourself, and that's something that they'll carry with them forever. You didn't back down, and you didn't let someone else tell you what's okay and what isn't. That's a victory in itself." Linda smiled, the warmth of Emma's words wrapping around her like a blanket. "Thanks, Emma. I needed to hear that." "Anytime, Linda," Emma replied. "And just so you know, I've got your back." If Karen tries to pull anything else, we'll handle it together. After the call ended, Linda stood in her kitchen, staring out the window at the laundry line still hanging in her backyard. The evening breeze rustled the clothes, and she felt a quiet sense of pride in the way they fluttered against the sky. Despite everything, the complaints, the tension, the legal threats, she had held firm. She wasn't backing down. The laundry line was more than just a way to dry clothes now. It had become a symbol of her resolve, a quiet rebellion against the forces that tried to make her feel small. For all the subtle hostility that remained in the neighborhood, Linda knew that she had done something important. She had refused to let anyone, not even Karen, dictate how she lived her life. That night, after the kids were in bed, Linda sat outside for a while, enjoying the cool night air. The world around her was quiet, but the echo of her fight still lingered. She thought about how far she had come, how much strength it had taken to stand up in that meeting, to face an audience that seemed all too willing to side with the person who made the loudest noise, not the one with the most valid argument. She thought about how Karen had tried to shame her, tried to force her to conform to a set of unwritten rules that didn't even make sense. And in the end, it was Linda who had come out on top, not because the rules were on her side, but because she was right. The world didn't need more conformity, it needed more room for people to live their lives authentically, without the fear of being judged for things that didn't harm anyone. The weeks passed, and although the tension in the neighborhood didn't completely dissipate, Linda began to notice small changes. Some of the neighbors who had once kept their distance started to wave at her again, offering brief greetings as they passed by. There were no longer whispered conversations and hushed voices when she walked down the street. Slowly, Linda began to feel the tension lift, though she knew it would take time for things to return to a sense of normalcy. But what she had realized over the past few weeks was this: people might judge you for standing up for yourself, but in the end, it was the people who weren't afraid to be true to themselves that made the biggest impact. And so, Linda continued to hang her laundry, each line of clothing flapping gently in the wind, a reminder that no matter how small or insignificant the battle, standing up for what was right was worth every moment of discomfort and struggle. The battle wasn't just about the laundry, it was about something much larger: the freedom to live authentically and the courage to defend that freedom when it was challenged. The victory wasn't just in the laundry line, it was in the knowledge that she had won the right to live her life on her own terms, and that, more than anything, was worth every ounce of the fight.